Everyone, welcome to the Political Insider. I'm Brett Smith, your humble host, and joining me today is Kat Anderson, who is a retired United States Air Force, a Bronze Star recipient, outspoken veterans advocate, and one of our talented writers at the Political Insider. Kat, welcome back.
Thank you. I love being here.
You know, with Thanksgiving next week, I thought we could take a break from the midterms and Trump and everything that's been going on and just kind of focus on
Can you really ever take a break from Trump though and politics?
This will be it. However long this is. It's a uniquely American holiday, Thanksgiving, and it's more than a meal with just friends and family. But for you, do you think the meaning of Thanksgiving changes as the years go by, or does it stay the same for you every year?
I think, I kind of touched on this with some of my articles I've written about Thanksgiving. When you're young, Thanksgiving, when you go to school, you learn about, the very abridged version, right, of what Thanksgiving is about, the Pilgrims and Squanto, and they have the meal to celebrate, they're coming together and collaborating. And then as you get older, you start learning more, the more intricacies about the holiday. And I think for me, Thanksgiving, it's not like I came from a poor household, but we didn't have a whole lot of means. So when it came to visiting family, it was like Christmas and maybe the summer. So Thanksgiving wasn't ever really, like, when I look back on my memories, like a huge family get together. But it definitely took on more meaning when I left home. As you said, I was in the service. So I joined at 18. I actually graduated high school early to go into the military.
That's right.
Yeah, when you're away from home and anybody that you've ever grown up with or that raised you, that you're used to seeing, and you have to learn to kind of coexist with essentially strangers, and you're all kind of in that same boat, holidays do kind of take on, I think, a different meaning naturally. So for me, as an adult, year to year, it kind of stayed the same. It went from being, about necessarily the history with the Pilgrims and the Native Americans and all of that, to being more about what the spirit of the holiday was about. So I spent, 19 out of 20 Thanksgivings either deployed or in a dorm room or overseas. So, it turned into a lot of kind of just being thankful for what I would have at the moment, because often I wouldn't have family around me during that time. So
you mentioned the abridged version. We were all taught this abridged version, at least Gen Xers were. I'm not sure what it is, probably for older millennials, the same thing. And it's this story basically about the Pilgrims came to the New World. They were struggling, and they met Squanto and some other Native Americans. And those Native Americans helped the Pilgrims better adapt and survive to the New World, which they weren't used to. And then for me, and I think probably a lot of conservatives, Rush Limbaugh retaught a lot of us the true meaning of Thanksgiving, which were the facts which were left out, all of which come from the journal of the man who led the Pilgrims to the New World, William Bradford, and anybody can read that. Among those facts were how after a year of basically living like communists, they saw starvation and death. I think half of them died, including Bradford's wife. So they assigned everyone their own plot of land, private property, and they adopted the profit motive, which led to capitalism. And then that yielded a huge surplus of food and goods, was something which they didn't have before. And they had so much of abundance of food and goods and whatnot that they celebrated with the Native Americans, gave thanks to God. And I think we're also at that point trading with the Native Americans. So it's fascinating what you learn later in life, the small details about this which were left out, which I think, for me, hearing Rush talk about that for the first time was, it was just mind blowing that there was this link to basically free markets and capitalism even before we were a country. Do you think Thanksgiving will still look the same 20 years from now, given education and everything else that's going on in public schools?
I don't think so. And I think we've already kind of seen it. So, I reflect a lot on my grandparents just because I have so many fond memories of them. And I think about like what holidays looked like for them when they were, my age and younger, and when they were kids, and just how it looks now. And it's changed so much. And even just education wise, it's changed. And so if you could look at, a holiday that just recently passed, Columbus Day. We've seen Columbus Day, change now to include Indigenous Peoples Day. And, I have, being in the service, you were forced to kind of get to know people from different, backgrounds and all of that. And, I don't personally have a problem with an Indigenous Day. I think it makes sense actually to have a day where, we celebrate the Indigenous people and their culture, especially here in North America. I think it makes perfect sense. Erasing Columbus Day, however, is where it gets complicated for those of us who especially are history buffs, right? Like you can't really have a celebration of Indigenous people without talking about Columbus discovering the New World, right? So you see that with that holiday, and then even with Thanksgiving. I mean, there's calls to change it to a national day of mourning, where, because of all of the atrocities that happened to Native Americans. And I think we have this, this desire for some reason to only focus on one aspect of history. And history, like, life in general is brutal and is complicated and is ugly lots of times. But you can't just celebrate the good, and you can't just celebrate the bad. If for whatever reason we've gotten into this cubby where it's like we only want to kind of wallow and elevate the bad parts of history and ignore the other side of it. And so I think it will probably change. I think in some ways, when you talk about what we learned in school about Thanksgiving, it really wasn't comprehensive enough, I think, if we're all going to be honest about it. But again, it's that walking that fine line of, you can celebrate the full aspects of history without, feeling like everybody must atone for something, like this National Day of Mourning that comes up every year, the last probably 5 or 10 years in relation to Thanksgiving. Get rid of Thanksgiving. Let's do a National Day of Mourning where we atone for what happened. Well, my ancestors weren't the Pilgrims. And even if they were, like, I can't control what my ancestors did. I shouldn't have to atone for anybody's sins except for my own. Same thing for my descendants. So
yeah, the other thing is judging pre-industrial people by way of societal norms today also seems to be a thing. We're gonna judge Columbus, and we're gonna judge everybody, who came from a pre-industrial age by today's standards, which I think is just absolutely insane. But it's also kind of the mark of the Marxist left and this idea of revisionist history, which we've all seen to one degree or another through education, public education. But the idea that homeschooling, charter schools, the proliferation of that should change probably Thanksgiving and the way it's taught, I would imagine, because there's probably a lot of rush babies and a lot of conservatives out there that not only include the part about how it was an absolute miracle that the Pilgrims made it to Plymouth Rock, made it to the New World, but then they just so happened to stumble upon the only English-speaking Native American in the area.
Yeah.
It's an absolute miracle when you really kind of take everything into account. As a veteran, what are some of the things that Americans might overlook that they should be thankful for this year?
Yeah, I say, I thought about this quite a bit, and my husband and I have talked about this leading up into the holidays. This is technically my first Thanksgiving as a veteran. I was officially retired December 1st of last year, so I was still technically in the military. And overall, I think any year Americans should be thankful for the opportunity to be with family on Thanksgiving. When I look back, like I said, I can only remember one Thanksgiving that I came home for whether it was because I like couldn't afford it or I was deployed or whatever. When you're away from the people that you identify with, right? Your family and family friends and things like that, it can be very lonely. And even though you build a military family, going to, on deployments, you go to the chow hall if you're lucky and you're not, you happen to get some time off on Thanksgiving to go eat, lukewarm turkey and drink non-alcoholic beer or sparkling cider. And you're sharing a table with your military family, but they're still not family. And when you sit at that table, it's amazing how you'll miss like the family members, or the family friends that maybe drive you a little crazy or, but when you're in the middle of nowhere deployed, you'd give anything to be with comfort, which comfort is family. And so I think Americans, especially in today's political climate, should be thankful that they have the opportunity to be with and see family members, even the ones you don't like. We did a video with Gretchen Smith for Code of Vets not that long ago about how hard inflation is hurting veterans. And then even just active duty, I think that there's this misconception that if you're in the military just takes care of you. You have a guaranteed paycheck, you have health care, you don't have to buy a whole bunch of clothes because you wear the same outfit every day. But young military families still feel inflation. I mean, you've got, these young men and women who they might have to go to the food kitchen to get, a family meal and that's a shame, right? So I think we're all feeling the pinch, but for those of us that are lucky enough to be able to provide, like go to the grocery store and buy those overpriced eggs and get the overpriced turkey, you should take comfort in that, because wearing the uniform should allow you some like automatic dignity. But when you wear the uniform and you have to get, assistance to feed your family, that dignity falls away.
We've got military on food stamps right now. That's how tough it is
Yes.
for them. So I think it's a great point. What's your most memorable Thanksgiving moment you remember when serving overseas?
So I was asking my husband that question too the other night, because they all kind of blend together when you've been overseas as much as us. So I want to tell you about my husband's most memorable one, and then I'll kind of talk about mine. So my husband was in the military, he was Air Force, he was a cop, and he does it, every single Thanksgiving that he can recall, he worked. So he doesn't even, most of the time he couldn't even go and get, the crappy turkey from the chow hall. But he was deployed one time and he was with a unit of Ugandan soldiers that were kind of on detail with them. And it was Thanksgiving. And he said that the one of the Ugandans that he worked with was so perplexed at this concept of giving thanks only one time of the day of the year, one day out of the year. He was like, I don't understand. Why do you specifically give thanks on one day? Why isn't it all the time? And my husband said it was a really interesting conversation to have with somebody who, because it's a uniquely American holiday. And he said, I tried my best to kind of explain how it's tied to our history, and it's a time to specifically take a knee and give thanks, and it was just completely lost on this soldier. Like, why wouldn't you do it all year? Which is kind of a interesting and good point, that we probably should be thankful more often than just once a year. But for me, I would say specifically overseas, it's those chow halls. So, I spent time deployed, and then I also was stationed overseas. I was stationed in Korea for a year and a half, in Portugal and in England. And, when you're, barring the deployments, when you're in Afghanistan and things like that, it can be pretty lonely, even in England or Portugal or Korea when it's Thanksgiving. And it's definitely hard to find a good turkey dinner in South Korea. It's not like a staple. So those are probably my fondest memories of you could always guarantee that you could go to a military chow hall anywhere overseas on Thanksgiving, and you're going to see the exact same hokey paper accordion turkeys hanging from the ceiling. You'll see leadership, and at one point I was leadership that, you know, stands and serves the really dry turkey, and they know to smother it in kind of the cold gravy, and sitting around at the table with just people from all different walks of life enjoying a meal that, you know, you just try and smother it with as much hot sauce and mashed potatoes as you can so that you can hurry up and get to the pies, because the pies were the best part of any deployed, because you can't really mess up, you know, just thawed out pie.
Pretty
so
bulletproof.
that would exactly, yeah, that would be my fondest memory, because that's really how almost every Thanksgiving for me was overseas.
Did you guys ever get like Domino's pizza? Do they ever like fly stuff in or treat you guys to something really special, or like a name brand or something like Burger King or something?
Yeah, so you know, occasionally you have gosh, what is the steakhouse? I think it's Outback.
Yeah.
Would send some steaks. I got to enjoy that. And those aren't necessarily surrounded by like a holiday. That just kind of happens. But
Right.
I think every military member knows about surf and turf. So every now and then, when you're deployed, you get the word that, hey, we're getting a shipment of surf and turf. And it's like people will adjust their schedule in the most amazing ways to make sure that they get the surf and turf. Even, you know, and the strangest things, when I was in Africa, every single day I would get a Choco Taco, because it's hot in Africa, in case you weren't aware. It's just unbearably hot, and nothing like solves that heat more than a Choco Taco. And all of my friends that I was deployed with in Africa, I made some really close friends during that 9-month deployment. When the Choco Taco was discontinued recently, I mean, it was a little bit of an emotional problem for us. Like, I have so many memories of like, oh yes, we got more Choco Tacos in. We're going to the chow hall to get it. Because that's the kind of stuff you get excited about when you're in the middle of nowhere, because it's that little bit of home. The last time I was in Afghanistan, I ended up being there longer than I was supposed to. And I would find myself every day just fantasizing about food.
Mm-hmm.
So I would, you know, like when we'd get, you know, good internet connection, I'd be Googling, you know, like, oh, what's new on the Taco Bell menu back at home? Because there's only so much chicken breast and broccoli you can eat. Like that's, you know, that's pretty much what gets churned out at the chow hall on a regular basis. So you're like, oh, I'd kill for a Crunchwrap Supreme, you know?
Yeah. Just anything that's got some taste, probably.
Yes.
I had read a while ago that Burger King that was in Baghdad International Airport would crank out insane amount of burgers every day, like 5,000 or something. But it was always busy, and you can see why, because it's that just small piece of home.
When a lot of times, of course, now this place is closed down, but there's a Manas, which is in oh my gosh, I can't believe it. It's like I'm an old veteran and I can't remember, Kyrgyzstan. You'd fly in from Afghanistan or whatever, you know, war zone you were at, and that's where you'd fly in to wait to go back home. And if you were lucky, you didn't have to wait too long. But most of us, you get stuck for, you know, a day to a week. And there was a Pizza Hut shack there.
Oh, wow.
And all you could get was, you know, just a little pepperoni or cheese pizza. And it was always like molten lava hot, but you didn't care. You'd be like, how many? Okay, I've got 6 hours until the flight heads back. I'm going to the Pizza Hut shack and standing in line. And when I was deployed to Kosovo, and we had a Burger King like hut. It wasn't even like, it was just like a little tiki hut type looking thing. And all they had was like your basic Whopper. And then at that, I remember, I think the Baconator was pretty big.
Okay. Yeah.
And so those were the two options you had. And at least twice a week, you'd see all that, because it was a NATO base, and you would hardly ever see any of like the German soldiers or Turks or anybody else there. It was always American soldiers at the BK hut to gorge on a Baconator.
You want to talk about
Because
being,
it was,
yeah.
yeah, it's the only thing, I need a taste of America. And now, anytime I would be home, and even now, I don't want anything to do with Burger King, but I
Yeah.
at least got it once a week there.
And and again, I mean, those are things to be grateful for. It's like the conversation your husband had about why do you guys only celebrate on one day. I would imagine if you got a personal pan pizza or you got a cheeseburger or a Whopper, I mean, you'd be in hog heaven and you'd probably be thanking God because it's again, it's a little bit, it's a taste of home, but also it's like comfort food. It's creature comforts because it's American.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it didn't really, like I said, it didn't even really matter if you were deployed. I remember I was in England for 2 years. And, when anytime you'd see a McDonald's, you'd be like, oh, let's have a little McDonald's. Cause it was a little taste of home,
Well, and isn't their
because
food
there's
just awful? I've heard their food, especially in England, it's just horrible.
it was not my favorite. You can only
Yeah.
eat so much bangers and mash and
Yeah.
fish and chips before you're over it. Although it still is the best Indian food I've ever had was in England. But it was the
Yeah.
same in Korea. I was at Kunsan, which is, Osan's kind of the hub.
Mhm.
And so at least once a month, everybody from Kunsan would take I think it was a 2 hour, maybe an hour and a half bus ride to get to Osan. And there was a Chili's restaurant on Osan. And that was, you'd be like, oh
Huge.
yeah, I'm gonna go to Chili's.
Huge. That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when my dad was stationed there back in Vietnam, they did not have a Chili's. So
Yeah.
slim
It's a
pickings
little
back
different,
then.
little different
A
now.
little different. Yeah. He Googled it one day. Google Earthed it. He couldn't recognize anything. I think he found a couple airstrips that were probably left over from that era, but it's a completely different place.
Yeah. And I'm
Um,
sure it's built up since I was there I was in Korea in '05.
yeah.
And I mean, there was even I think there was a Krispy Kreme, if I remember right, at Osan.
Wow.
Because yes, there was, because I would get a dozen Krispy Kreme before I'd have to catch the bus back. And I would sit there on the bus with my Krispy Kreme that I would give to my friends, and
Yeah.
always reserve two for me. But
That's you bargain with something like that,
yeah.
probably do a little horse trading. Well, hey, sadly we're out of time. Thanks so much. Give everyone your social media coordinates, where they can find you and where they can find your work.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. I always love coming on. It's one of my favorite things to do. You can find me on Twitter at Mohawk Moderate. It's there in my little label there. And of course, you can find me on thepoliticalinsider.com.
Yep. Well, thanks so much. And again, happy Thanksgiving to you, and happy Thanksgiving to all of the Political Insider viewers and readers. And have a wonderful holiday.
Yeah, you too. Happy Thanksgiving.